Good evening, it's Cora. Come closer while I tell you about the night I answered a captain's distress call and watched her walk in behind me. At midnight, the emergency frequency cracked open with Captain Sabine Ward's voice reporting an engine room fire and ordering every rescue craft toward Black Glass Reef. I reached for the transmit key, hearing panic tighten beneath her discipline. Beside my console, the old brass Morse key gleamed like a useless relic. I had just alerted Joe Alvarez when the radio room door opened hard enough to rattle the glass. Captain Sabine Ward stood there in a rain-dark coat, breathing evenly, her rescue vessel tied safely below us. The false voice kept speaking through my headset. Sabine listened for 3 seconds, then leaned toward the console. "That recording is using my voice," she said. "But it is not me." I muted the room speaker and kept the channel open in my left ear. Sabine did not touch my equipment. She pointed through the window toward the Night Heron, every deck light steady at the dock. Joe confirmed the vessel had not moved. On frequency, Sabine ordered crews away from the harbor mouth. I answered only with the approved challenge code. The voice ignored it and repeated the reef coordinates. That failure mattered. Real captains sometimes missed codes under pressure, but they did not breathe in identical intervals. I marked the timestamps while Joe held rescue craft inside the breakwater and checked whether anyone was actually burning near Black Glass Reef. Sabine watched me work without crowding. "Tell me what you hear," she said. "Not what you think I want you to hear." It was the first reason I trusted her. The call ended after 47 seconds. No mayday followed, no beacon appeared, and patrol radar showed empty water around the reef. Joe kept one crew ready while she reopened normal traffic. Sabine asked whether I could prove the voice was false. I looked at the waveform blooming across my monitor and hated how much the answer depended on uncertainty. "I can prove differences," I said. "Proof of source will take longer." The brass Morse key beside my console had been mounted there when the harbor radio room became historic enough for tours. It no longer connected to the transmitter. I used its cool lever to steady my hand while exporting the recording. Sabine noticed. "Does that thing work?" "Only emotionally," I said. Her mouth almost smiled. Outside, black water moved under antique gold harbor lamps, innocent as a polished lie. Joe locked the original file under Harbor Evidence Procedure and assigned me a working copy. That distinction kept me breathing. I was a civilian operator, not a detective, and I had learned the cost of confusing instinct with authority. Sabine gave Joe her bridge access logs before anyone asked. "My ship, my voice, my responsibility," she said. Then she looked at me. "Your analysis, your boundaries." We listened again through isolated headphones. The false Sabine reported heat, smoke, and failing suppression, but every sentence began on the same fractional beat. Human fear changed timing. This fear had been arranged. I enlarged the breaths and found clipped room tone beneath them, a quiet mechanical pulse repeating every 6 seconds. Sabine heard only noise. I heard an engine waiting behind a curtain. Dev Patel arrived carrying a diagnostic case and enough cables to restrain a small whale. He was the harbor's marine electronics engineer and my favorite person to call when sound started behaving like machinery. He listened once, frowned, and asked Sabine for permission to inspect the Night Heron's audio chain. She agreed, then added, "Tessa controls the evidence copy. We do not improvise around it." Dev gave me an approving nod. Before we left Harbor Radio, I tapped the dead Morse key twice, then once, testing its spring. Sabine tilted her head. "What did that mean?" "Nothing. It is disconnected." "That seems wasteful." I told her old operators used simple check-ins when speech was impossible. She touched one finger to the brass base, not the lever. "Then perhaps nothing can still become useful." Her voice made the room feel smaller. The Night Heron's bridge smelled of rain, coffee, and clean electrical heat. Gold instrument light edged Sabine's face while Dev photographed cable routes. I stayed near the recorder rack and asked before opening each panel. Sabine answered every question directly, even when the answer embarrassed her. The bridge system stored training playback, incident reviews, and public safety demonstrations. Her voice existed in more places than any of us liked. We found no unauthorized transmission in the ship's logs. The modern bridge microphone added a tiny encrypted timing stamp to every outgoing call, invisible to ordinary listeners but measurable in the recording. The false distress lacked it. I felt relief too quickly. A missing stamp proved the signal had not passed through Sabine's bridge. It did not prove who had made it, where, or why rescue crews had been sent toward a barren reef. Sabine stood at the chart table, hands flat beside Black Glass Reef. "My training recordings are public," she said. "Last year I narrated emergency drills for 3 coastal agencies. Clear speech, repeated phrases, isolated audio." Dev winced. I understood before she finished. Someone had harvested enough clean samples to clone her voice. Sabine's jaw tightened, but she did not hide the fact. "Put that in the report," she said. I asked whether anyone had threatened her or the Night Heron. She shook her head. Salvage disputes, budget arguments, angry boat owners, ordinary harbor friction, not personal obsession. That answer disappointed the part of me that wanted one obvious motive. Sabine caught my expression. "You prefer villains with labels?" "I prefer signals that identify themselves." "How considerate of you." Her humor was dry enough to preserve evidence. Dev pulled archived bridge audio while I compared phrase fragments. The false call had stitched engine room, suppression failure, and Black Glass Reef from separate recordings, then smoothed the seams. The clone sounded flawless until consonants met breath. Sabine said reef with a softened final sound after long watches. The recording used her rested pronunciation. "Apparently my imposter sleeps 8 hours, she said. I laughed before I could stop myself. The laugh changed something and made me wary. Sabine was powerful in every practical way that mattered aboard her vessel, while I was a consultant Joe might hire for a week. Attraction could turn a clean investigation muddy. I stepped back from the chart table. Before this goes further, I need written evidence handling limits and a clear reporting line that does not run through you. Sabine answered immediately. Agreed. We moved to the dry dock office where rain struck tall windows above scarred wooden desks. Joe drafted a temporary consulting order. Sabine would provide access but could not direct my conclusions, approve my hours, or decide whether the harbor retained me. Dev would document every device test. I added a clause requiring 2 witnesses for any live transmission experiment. Sabine read it and said, "Good. Make it harder for all of us to be careless." Joe asked the question nobody wanted. Could the harbor shut the emergency channel until we understood the attack? No. Fishing boats, ferries, and coastal homes depended on it. Could we ignore Sabine's voice? Also no. A real distress call might come from the Night Heron tomorrow. Our problem was not merely a fake message. It was a weapon aimed at trust itself, and maritime procedure could not survive by becoming suspicious of everyone. I built a provisional test: challenge code, bridge timing stamp, breath variability, and background harmonic. None alone would decide authenticity. Together, they could guide response while crews verified position through radar and beacon data. Joe approved it as advisory, not absolute. That wording mattered to me. A tool should support judgment, I said, not pretend judgment can be deleted. Sabine met my eyes. I have been waiting years to hear someone say that. Near dawn, we returned to harbor radio. The false call had produced no wreck, yet one private rescue launch had burned fuel racing halfway to the reef. Another had left the ferry corridor uncovered for 9 minutes. Sabine traced that gap on my map. This was rehearsal or diversion. I heard the quiet certainty in her voice, then the softer addition. Or I could be wrong. She made uncertainty sound like discipline, not weakness. We slept in separate buildings for 3 hours. When I returned, Sabine had left a sealed copy of every public training file with Joe, plus a handwritten index in precise block letters. She had not left me a note. I appreciated that more than flowers would have frightened me. Professional restraint is rarely romantic in movies. In real life, it can feel like someone building a safe railing before you reach the stairs. Dev isolated the mechanical pulse beneath the false call. It was not Sabine's ship. The Night Heron's twin diesels produced paired harmonics with a slight offset under hotel load. This pulse was single, compact, and rough at low frequency, like a portable generator mounted near a steel wall. We searched harbor equipment records and found too many possibilities. Every work barge, repair shed, and salvage truck seemed to own its own angry little engine. Joe brought us fuel logs and vessel movements. One insured cargo barge, Meridian Star, was scheduled to transit outside Black Glass Reef in 4 nights. Its owner had recently disputed towing costs with Corbin Voss, whose private salvage company held a broad recovery contract for grounded commercial cargo. The fact was interesting, not proof. I wrote Voss's name in my notes and underlined nothing. Certainty had once betrayed me through other people's impatience. Sabine knew Voss professionally. He was competent, expensive, and fond of treating maritime law like a menu from which he could order only profitable sections. She had refused his request to stage equipment inside the rescue berth during storm season. "He dislikes limits," she said. "That describes half the harbor." I asked if he had access to her recordings. Everyone did. Her answer left the room colder than the weather. We needed location data from the false transmitter. Dev proposed a controlled rebroadcast from several harbor points while I measured signal strength and multipath delay. Joe approved a test using a licensed training frequency, not the emergency channel. Sabine offered the Night Heron's tender. I declined because it would make her both access provider and operational lead. She nodded once. "Use the pilot boat. I will come only as a subject matter witness if Joe requests me." Joe requested her. That afternoon, the 4 of us boarded the pilot boat under low clouds. Sabine wore weather gear instead of command black, which should not have made her more distracting. It did. I sat beside Dev's receiver array and pretended cables required my full emotional commitment. Sabine checked my life jacket strap, then stopped before touching it. "May I?" she asked. I said yes. Consent, offered in small places, changes the whole shape of danger. We ran the first transmission beside the ferry channel. Dev sent a synthetic tone carrying fragments of my own voice because I refused to use Sabine's samples outside controlled storage. I watched delay patterns slide across 3 screens. Reflections from warehouses created ghost sources, each plausible for a few seconds. Sabine steered the pilot boat through chop with quiet precision. "Signals lie about distance," I said. "Water does too," she answered. At the outer buoy, wind sharpened and the harbor narrowed behind us. I asked Sabine to hold position near a line of moored work barges. She corrected for current before I finished the coordinates. The receiver caught our test signal bouncing from black hulls. One echo arrived with the same 6-second pulse found beneath the false call. Dev and I looked at each other. It was not a source match, but the environment could reproduce the hidden rhythm. The pulse strengthened near a service pier leased by several companies, including Voss Marine Recovery. Anonymous workers moved cranes in the distance, too far for faces. Joe reminded us over radio that shared access meant shared suspicion. Sabine did not push toward Voss's berth. She turned where instructed and kept the boat inside our permit zone. Power impressed me most when it accepted a boundary without performing resentment. A wake struck us broadside. My equipment case slid and Sabine caught the handle while I caught Dev's receiver. Our shoulders collided. Her face came close enough for me to see a pale scar near her eyebrow and the concentration replacing surprise. "You all right?" "Yes." Neither of us moved immediately. Then she released the case first. The choice was so deliberate that my pulse became the least reliable instrument aboard. We tested from 3 more positions. The pattern suggested the original transmitter had operated somewhere east of harbor radio, low over water, close to corrugated steel. That included the service pier, 2 maintenance barges, and an abandoned fish processing shed. Joe would seek camera records and access logs through proper channels. I wanted a cleaner answer. Sabine read it on my face. "Ambiguity is not failure, Tessa." I wished she had chosen a less intimate truth. On the return run, rain flattened the harbor into silver-black sheets. Sabine gave me the wheel for 30 seconds while she adjusted a loose canopy latch. I protested that I was not licensed for more than basic handling. "You are supervised," she said, "and I am asking, not ordering." The boat answered slowly beneath my hands. Sabine stood close without touching. Trust, I discovered, could feel more dangerous than speed. Back at the dock, Dev downloaded the measurements while Joe logged our chain of custody. Sabine waited outside the dry dock office until I invited her into the analysis meeting. It was a minor courtesy, almost absurd after she had piloted us safely through bad water. Still, it told me she remembered the line I had drawn. "You keep boundaries like navigation lights," she said. "So people know where not to wreck," I replied. The service pier cameras showed a white utility van entering 2 hours before the false call and leaving 12 minutes after it ended. The plate was obscured by rain and road grime. Its roof carried a collapsible antenna housing common to survey crews and salvage operators. Joe requested lease records. Dev found the 6-second pulse in the van's departure audio, captured faintly by a gate microphone. The same class of generator, perhaps the same machine. It still was not enough. Many portable units shared that harmonic. I said so twice because everyone had gone quiet in the expectant way that made my skin tighten. Joe did not pressure me. Sabine crossed her arms and told the room, "We build the case Tessa can defend, not the answer we find convenient." The sentence loosened something behind my ribs. Being believed before certainty felt almost unbearable. We compared public recordings against the clone's phrasing. One source file came from a coastal response seminar sponsored by Voss Marine Recovery. Sabine had demonstrated how to report an engine room fire, including the exact order toward Black Glass Reef. Voss's company had hosted the audio online before removing it months earlier. Dev recovered a cached copy. Sabine stared at the file date. "He did not need to steal from my ship," she said. "I handed the harbor my voice." "You gave people training," I told her. "Someone else chose misuse." She looked at me with an expression I could not decode quickly enough. "You say that as if you have practiced it." I turned back to the waveform. "I practice many things. Avoidance among them?" Her tone was gentle, not triumphant. I said we needed to finish the comparison. She let me retreat. That mercy made the retreat feel smaller. The cached seminar audio contained a flaw. A faint double click before each exercise, produced by an antique demonstration key used to cue trainees. I glanced toward harbor radio, thinking of the brass Morse key beside my console. The clone had erased the clicks, but its sentence spacing preserved their cadence. Sabine's modern bridge never used mechanical cueing. The false transmission had been assembled by someone who mistook old timing for her natural rhythm. We could now prove the call did not originate from Sabine's bridge and likely drew from the Voss-sponsored seminar. We still could not prove Voss had transmitted it. Joe warned us not to confuse opportunity with authorship. I agreed, though impatience scraped at me. Sabine asked what the next lawful step was. "Find the transmitter's physical signature," I said. Dev grinned. "Now you are speaking my dialect." Portable transmitters leaked tiny frequency shifts when their power supply cycled under load. Dev needed a longer sample than the 47-second call. We planned a silent watch across the next 2 nights, monitoring for tests, fragments, or accidental carrier bursts. Sabine volunteered the Night Heron's bridge logs and crew schedule, then left before Joe assigned duties. She did not make herself necessary. I noticed her absence immediately. The first silent watch began at 10. Joe handled harbor traffic while I filtered the empty spaces between calls. Dev set a spectrum display beside my console. Sabine arrived with 4 coffees, placed them on the visitor shelf, and asked whether she was permitted inside the evidence zone. I pointed to a taped line on the floor. "Your coffee may cross, you may not." "A harsh but rational system," she said. She sat beyond the line with her back to the window, reading maintenance reports. Every 20 minutes, she lifted 2 fingers in question. I answered by tapping the disconnected brass key twice. Safe, still listening. On the 3rd exchange, she tapped 1 knuckle against her mug in reply. The old key became our check-in without carrying evidence, rank, or expectation. It said only, "I am here. Are you all right?" Near midnight, a carrier flickered below the emergency band and vanished. Dev marked it. I heard a low engine pulse beneath the static, then nothing. Sabine remained still while I replayed the burst. The power cycle matched the false call within a narrow range. We triangulated a rough source near the eastern service basin. Joe notified patrol, but by the time they arrived, the basin held only rain and locked equipment sheds. The burst lasted 9 seconds, too short for attribution. I felt the familiar pressure to make it mean more. Sabine crossed to the taped line but did not step over it. "What do you need?" she asked. Not what did I know. Not who did I suspect. What did I need? "Another sample," I said. "And for nobody to act like this one is enough." She tapped her mug once. Understood. At 2, Joe rotated out and left us with a second operator in the outer room. Sabine poured fresh coffee into my cup without asking how I took it because she had noticed I drank it black. That attention felt intimate in a way compliments rarely did. "You memorize small things," I said. "A captain who forgets preferences gets bad coffee and quiet mutiny." "So this is command strategy?" "Entirely. No tenderness involved." We watched the spectrum in silence. Sabine's presence did not demand conversation, which made me want it. I asked about the scar near her eyebrow. She said a loose shackle had taught her to wear eye protection and humility. Then she asked why I listened to breath before words. "Breath is harder to rehearse," I said. The answer was true and incomplete. She accepted it without prying, another boundary honored without applause. At 3:13, a voice fragment appeared. Sabine saying, "All craft," followed by a burst of synthetic noise. I froze the buffer. The consonants came from the seminar file, but the background harmonic ran faster than before. Dev explained that the generator was under heavier load, possibly powering an antenna amplifier. Whoever was preparing the clone expected to transmit farther next time. Sabine's face hardened. "Then next time is planned." We mapped likely targets. Black Glass Reef lay beside the Meridian Star's route, and the barge's insurer had a storm loss clause that increased salvage reimbursement after grounding. Public weather forecasts showed a coastal system arriving on transit night. Voss's company had recently moved recovery cranes to the eastern basin, claiming routine maintenance. Each fact fit. Together, they formed a motive. Still not proof. I wrote that sentence across the top of my screen. Sabine asked Joe to place an independent rescue crew near the barge route. Joe refused because shifting scarce crews without verified risk could weaken ferry coverage. Sabine did not argue rank or reputation. She proposed a reversible alternative. Keep the Night Heron fueled, brief crews on the authentication protocol, and request Coast Guard awareness without closing traffic. Joe approved. Watching them disagree safely taught me more about leadership than any polished training file. Our second night watch began with no coffee because Sabine was called to inspect a steering fault aboard a ferry. I told myself the room felt ordinary without her. The brass key disagreed, sitting silent under the gold lamp. At 11:40, she entered carrying 2 paper cups and a grease mark on her cheek. "Ferry is safe," she said, "and your cruel beverage policy remains in force." If you enjoy dark harbor stories where trust has to be earned one careful choice at a time, subscribe to Cora's GL Nights. Then stay close, because the signal we caught next was quieter than a whisper and far more dangerous. Beneath an ordinary weather transmission, I heard the 6-second generator pulse and a rehearsal of my own challenge code, spoken in Sabine's cloned voice. Someone had monitored our response and adapted. The clone now answered the first authentication phrase correctly. My stomach dropped, not because the code had failed, but because procedure had become part of the attacker's training data. Joe canceled the code immediately and shifted to a rotating vessel-specific response, delivered in person to captains. Sabine asked whether the brass key could provide something harder to copy. I looked at its unequal mechanical return. The key's spring produced tiny timing variations depending on pressure and release. 2 taps from me would never match 2 taps from Sabine. Yet each person's pattern remained recognizable over short periods. It was not secure encryption. It was an analog liveness check, useful only when paired with voice, location, and bridge stamps. Dev could route the sound through a protected local channel for tests. Joe approved a limited trial. Sabine practiced at the console after evidence recording stopped. Her first taps were too forceful. "You are interrogating the key," I said. "It is withholding cooperation." I placed my fingers beside hers, not over them, and demonstrated a lighter touch. Antique brass clicked under gold light. Our hands nearly met. She glanced at me. "Permission to try again?" "Granted, Captain." The title sounded different in my mouth. Her second pattern was clean. Short, short, held. Mine answered, short, held, short. We agreed it meant safe to answer, nothing more. The signal would never replace formal procedure, but it could verify that a live person at a known station controlled the circuit. Sabine recorded her pattern with Joe and Dev present. Afterward, she tapped it once only for me. I answered before remembering to be cautious. The intimacy of that exchange unsettled me. We had created a language whose meaning was operational, yet my body heard something personal. I shut down the test channel and began labeling files. Sabine leaned against the visitor shelf. "We can stop using it between us outside drills." "Do you want to?" I asked. "No," she said, "but I want you to know that wanting is not permission." My breath changed. Of course she noticed. I told her the check-in could stay, provided either of us could ignore it without explanation. She accepted the rule. Then she said, "Your breathing went shallow." I almost laughed. That is invasive coming from someone whose cloned respiratory pattern is on my screen. Occupational contamination. Her smile was small and tired. I tapped the key twice. She answered on her mug. Safe. Still listening. Dev's harmonic model narrowed the equipment class to a compact marine generator sold with Voss recovery skids. 3 other local companies owned similar units, but Voss's newest unit had a repaired governor that produced a distinctive flutter at startup. A maintenance invoice confirmed the repair. We needed a fresh signal containing startup. Joe requested a warrant through authorities for company equipment logs, not a raid. Procedure moved slower than fear. The coastal forecast worsened. Meridian Star's owner delayed transit by 1 day, but cargo contracts made further delay expensive. Voss publicly offered discounted escort and recovery coverage, which the owner declined. Sabine read the notice and said, "He benefits whether the barge hires him or grounds without him." I added, "And a diverted rescue fleet makes the grounding more likely." Our case had a shape now. Shapes could still be shadows. Joe scheduled a controlled storm drill before the weather arrived, using the night heron, pilot boat, and shore stations. The purpose was safety, not bait. We would test authenticated calls under rain, engine noise, and divided attention. Sabine asked whether I wanted to remain ashore. "I want the bridge environment," I said. "Then you come as a consultant, not crew. You may stop at any moment." I signed the drill plan. Before boarding, Sabine showed me every exit, handhold, and safe seat. She did not soften the hazards or use them to impress me. "If I give a safety order, it is operational," she said. "If anything feels personal, tell me and I will step back." I appreciated the clarity, though part of me wished attraction came with colored lights and a maritime handbook. Mine mostly came with inconveniently beautiful competence. The drill began under hard rain. Dev transmitted a synthetic distress call from the pilot boat while Joe coordinated from harbor radio. I tracked bridge stamps, code response, and live Morse timing through headphones. Sabine maneuvered the night heron along the breakwater, her commands concise and calm. The vessel lifted beneath us. My stomach objected to the sea's punctuation, but my analysis remained clean. I counted breaths instead of waves. A simulated engine alarm sounded. Sabine's crew followed procedure while she asked me to authenticate a second call. The voice sample was hers, but the Morse timing belonged to Joe. "False identity, live authorized operator," I reported. Sabine adjusted course based on radar, not the voice alone. The drill proved our layered method could guide judgment without replacing it. It also proved I could work beside Sabine while wanting to touch her. Then the pilot boat's transmitter failed for real. Dev's backup beacon appeared, but his voice vanished. Sabine looked at me. "Can you locate the carrier?" I found a weak harmonic under the rain and estimated his bearing. She checked radar, confirmed the boat, and altered course. Neither of us treated my estimate as command. Combined with her navigation, it brought the night heron alongside within 4 minutes. Deb stood under the pilot boat canopy, soaked and furious at a corroded connector. He gave us a thumbs up while Sabine's crew passed a replacement radio. The incident was minor, controlled, and exactly why drills mattered. My hands still shook afterward. Sabine noticed but did not announce it. She tapped short, held against the brass rail. I answered short, held short with my knuckles. Safe to answer. The storm drill continued. At the outer marker, a squall erased the harbor lights and turned the windows into black mirrors. Sabine asked whether I wanted to end my participation. I wanted to say no automatically. Instead, I checked my body, my equipment, and my judgment. I can continue for 20 minutes, then reassess. Her expression warmed. That is a better answer than bravery. It felt like praise without possession. During the final test, Joe sent 2 overlapping calls, one verified fishing vessel with a medical issue, and one cloned voice directing us toward the reef. Sabine assigned crew to support the real vessel, maintained position, and requested independent confirmation before moving. I detected the clone through breath repetition and missing bridge stamp. We passed the drill. More importantly, nobody had needed me to be infallible. They had needed me to contribute. After docking, adrenaline left me cold. Sabine found me alone on the storm breakwater, staring at waves striking the outer stones. She stopped several feet away. "Company?" she asked. I nodded. She stood beside me without touching. For a while, we listened to water and distant engines. "You count when you are frightened," she said. "You become more formal." "I am always formal." "Tessa, you called a wave, sir." I laughed, then the laugh broke too close to something painful. Sabine waited. The harbor lights blurred in rain. "A former employer blamed me after an ambiguous distress call," I said. I recommended verification because the signal was weak and inconsistent. The caller was real. Help arrived late. I had told the facts before. I had never admitted the wound beneath them. They said my caution became cruelty. Sabine did not rush to absolve me. "Was your recommendation within procedure?" "Yes." "Was the system understaffed?" "Yes." "Did they need one person to carry the failure?" I looked at her. She was not offering easy innocence. She was placing responsibility where evidence supported it. "They chose me," I said, "and now certainty feels like the only way I am allowed to speak." She rested both hands on the wet stone wall. "I perform certainty," she said. "Women captains are punished for visible doubt. If I say I am considering options, some men hear weakness before they hear the options. So I learned to sound absolute." A wave broke below us. "The performance protects my crew until it prevents collaboration. That is the line I am afraid of crossing." We stood in the cold with our separate habits exposed. Mine turned every feeling into a signal. Hers turned every uncertainty into command. "You asked me what I needed," I said, "not what answer I had. Because I needed your judgment, not your obedience." The words entered me slowly. I tapped our pattern against the stone. Sabine answered. The private signal changed again. It no longer meant only safe. It meant uncertainty could be shared. I wanted to kiss her then. The desire arrived clean and terrifying. Sabine's gaze dropped to my mouth, then returned to my eyes. She stepped back first. "Not while your contract touches my operation," she said. Relief and disappointment collided so hard I nearly smiled. Agreed. "And not while danger is making every feeling louder." Also agreed. We left the breakwater side by side, wanting intact and boundaries brighter than ever. The next morning, Sabine submitted a formal recusal from any decision about my consulting extension, payment, or future harbor role. Joe showed me the document because transparency was part of the agreement. Sabine had also delegated access approval for the Night Heron's recordings to an independent safety officer. She did not tell me she had done it. She simply removed the imbalance before asking for anything personal. That choice reached deeper than flirtation. Authorities obtained Voss Marine Recovery's equipment records. One portable transmitter and generator skid had been checked out on the night of the false call, supposedly for a shoreline survey. The employee's signature belonged to Voss himself. GPS tracking had been disabled for maintenance. The unit returned before dawn with salt spray on its eastern panel. Suspicious, yes. Conclusive, no. Voss claimed the paperwork reflected a dockside antenna test. Dev compared the repair governor's flutter to our 9-second burst. The probability of a match was high, but environmental reflections could distort the spectrum. He refused to overstate it. I loved him for that. Sabine reviewed the technical summary and asked one question. What evidence would turn high probability into identification? Dev answered, a startup sequence during transmission. We needed the generator to reveal its full mechanical signature. Joe increased monitoring without broadcasting our theory. The harbor could not close channels, and warning Voss might drive him to a different method. Crews received the rotating protocol in person. Sabine trained captains to treat voice as one signal among many, including beacon, radar, code, location, and behavior. She used her own clone as the example. Public embarrassment became a safety lesson because she chose disclosure over pride. Meridian Star's transit moved to the same evening the coastal storm was expected to peak. Its owner rejected Voss's escort again, but accepted a neutral tug near the outer channel. That reduced the grounding risk, which should have comforted me. Instead, I imagined Voss adapting. A prepared scheme rarely vanished when one route closed. It looked for another opening. The harbor had ferries, fishing boats, and rescue crews stretched across weather. At Dry Dock Office, we built a response matrix for simultaneous real and false calls. Joe retained lawful rescue command. Sabine controlled the Night Heron only within assignments. I would authenticate signals and state confidence levels, never issue vessel orders. Dev would compare live harmonics. We wrote the limits at the top of every page. In crisis, boundaries should not depend on memory. They should already be visible. Sabine and I rehearsed the matrix on the Night Heron bridge. I read conflicting signals. She made operational choices aloud. When my confidence dropped below 60%, she asked for alternate verification instead of pushing me upward. Uncertainty is data, she said. I wrote the line in the margin. She caught me. Quoting me? Documenting a rare captain behaving sensibly. Then preserve the specimen carefully. During a break, she showed me the bridge cabinet where the protected Morse receiver would live. Temporary installation only, she said. No private channel hidden on my vessel. I appreciated the distinction. Our check-in could be personal only off-duty and separate from emergency systems. We labeled every circuit with purpose and access. Romance, I was learning, became safer when it survived documentation. Dev installed a sensor near the harbor entrance to capture generator startups from low-mounted transmitters. The device could not identify speech or private conversations. It recorded only narrow mechanical bands and timestamps. Joe posted the required public notice. Voss's attorney objected anyway, calling it targeted surveillance. The objection told us nothing about guilt. It did tell us Voss was watching harbor procedure as closely as we watched his equipment. That evening, Sabine and I met at Dawn Pier after our shifts by explicit agreement, not accident. We stood under pale lamps with 3 feet between us. My recusal is active, she said. Your contract decisions are Joe's. The emergency is not over. No. Then we wait. Her eyes held mine. Yes. It was the most restrained date I had ever had, and somehow one of the most intimate. We talked about everything except the case. Sabine repaired old watches badly but persistently. I collected recordings of foghorns from ports I had never visited. She lived aboard a small houseboat on the north side of the harbor. I rented an apartment above a closed tailor shop. Neither of us suggested changing those facts. Desire did not require immediate merger. It could stand on a pier and learn someone's ordinary life. When we parted, she asked, "May I touch your hand?" I said yes. Her fingers closed around mine once, warm and steady, then released. No kiss. No bargain hidden inside the touch. I walked home with my palm tingling and my mind uselessly replaying the exact pressure. For a woman who decoded signals, I was embarrassingly vulnerable to one clearly transmitted message. The next day brought a real mayday from a fishing boat with a flooding compartment. Our protocol worked. The caller's voice shook, the code arrived late, and the beacon confirmed position. Sabine responded with the night heron while another crew covered the ferry lane. I authenticated the call at moderate confidence, not absolute. Nobody punished the number. The rescue succeeded because procedure allowed uncertainty without paralysis. When Sabine returned, she tapped our pattern through the protected local circuit after formal traffic ended. I answered. Then she came to Harbor Radio, remained beyond the evidence line, and said, "Good work." I told her the crew had done the dangerous part. "You made their decision clearer." Praise usually made me search for hidden terms. Hers felt specific enough to trust. Joe received financial records showing Voss's salvage company faced a severe cash shortage. A major recovery contract from Meridian Star could keep his business solvent through winter. The barge's policy rewarded rapid mobilization, and Voss had pre-positioned cranes before any accident. Motive tightened. His technical preparation explained the clone. Still, the legal case needed proof connecting his equipment to an actual deceptive transmission. Dev found a second clue in the false call. A brief phase wobble whenever the cloned voice crossed a loud consonant. The wobble matched a portable amplifier model sold with Voss's antenna skid. We added it to our live detection package. The combination of generator startup, amplifier wobble, seminar cadence, missing bridge stamp, and code behavior would be distinctive. None alone would carry the weight. Sabine insisted that all crews receive the same detection summary, including Voss-affiliated contractors who performed legitimate work. "Safety information cannot become bait," she said. Joe agreed. I watched Sabine choose a principle that might make catching Voss harder. That was when admiration settled into something deeper. She wanted justice, but she wanted the harbor intact afterward more. The storm arrived early, driving burgundy warning lamps through sheets of rain. Meridian Star delayed outside the harbor with a neutral tug attached. Passenger ferries reduced service but did not stop. Hundreds of adults still needed to cross the bay. Night Heron took station near the ferry corridor. I began the emergency watch with Dev beside me and Joe at command. Before Sabine departed Harbor Radio, she stood outside the evidence line. "Operational check," she said. I tapped short, held, short on the brass key. She answered short, short, held. "Safe to answer," I said. "Safe to trust the process," she replied. Neither of us said anything personal. We did not need to. The storm carried enough pressure without adding promises. Wind noise filled every open channel. Real callers clipped words, forgot codes, and talked over one another. I ranked signals by corroboration and stated confidence with every assessment. Joe dispatched resources in layers. Dev watched harmonics. For 2 hours, the system held. Then a coastal sensor reported a brief generator startup east of the service basin. The signature fluttered exactly where Dev predicted. Seconds later, Sabine's cloned voice broke over the emergency frequency. "Engine room fire aboard Night Heron. Explosion risk. All rescue craft proceed to Black Glass Reef." The message carried the new rotating code. It included realistic breath variation. It even inserted bridge noise stolen from public videos. For one sick instant, it sounded more like Sabine than Sabine had ever allowed herself to sound. At the same moment, a passenger ferry south of the breakwater reported steering failure in heavy seas. Its captain's voice was unfamiliar, strained, and partially masked by alarms. Radar showed the ferry drifting toward the outer wall. Night Heron was the closest rescue vessel. The false call demanded that Sabine abandon it and run toward the reef. Voss had chosen a real crisis as camouflage. Joe looked at me. Not for certainty, for contribution. I checked the clone's bridge stamp. Absent. The rotating code was correct, meaning someone had monitored recent traffic or obtained it from a compromised handout. Breath variation had been added, but the pauses still aligned with antique cue timing. I struck the brass Morse key beside my console and recorded its mechanical return. The key's analog click traveled through our protected circuit to Night Heron. Sabine answered from her bridge receiver. Her live pattern arrived with human pressure drift and the bridge's encrypted timing stamp. The false call repeated a digitally perfect pattern copied from an earlier test. It was too exact. No spring returns to the same fraction of a millisecond twice. The obsolete museum piece exposed the modern lie. False Sabine call, high confidence, I told Joe. Portable source East Basin. Live night heron verified on local circuit. Dev pointed to his display. The generator startup and amplifier wobble matched Voss's checked-out skid within the limits of our model. Joe relayed the evidence to coastal authorities and ordered no rescue craft toward Black Glass Reef without independent distress confirmation. Sabine's real voice came over the protected line, calm but not absolute. Night heron maintaining with the passenger ferry. Request tug support on my starboard approach. Joe approved. Sabine did not chase the transmitter, defend her reputation, or turn toward the false emergency. She chose the people visibly in danger. Her expertise made the decision. My analysis only cleared the noise around it. The ferry's steering locked hard to port. Through bridge audio, I heard engines strain and passengers shouting in distant corridors. Sabine positioned Night Heron between the ferry and the breakwater while a tug closed from the north. She ordered a tow line prepared, then paused to ask the ferry captain whether propulsion remained available. Collaboration entered her command voice without weakening it. The portable transmitter sent another burst, now claiming fire had reached Night Heron's fuel system. The clone inserted a tremor that would have sounded convincing to anyone who believed fear had one correct shape. I heard the amplifier wobble sharpen as its power load rose. Dev captured the startup sequence in full. The repaired governor flutter matched Voss's maintenance baseline across 5 independent markers. Authorities tracked the signal to a movable recovery skid near the eastern basin. Joe did not send us. She directed harbor patrol and coastal officers while maintaining rescue command. Cameras showed anonymous responders converging on the equipment area as the transmission cut off. We stayed at our stations. No dramatic confrontation, no private revenge. A safe arrest mattered more than a satisfying scene. On the water, the tug reached the ferry but could not hold a stable angle. Sabine proposed using Night Heron as a controlled buffer while the ferry restarted auxiliary steering. Joe asked for her risk assessment. Sabine gave it plainly, including what she did not know. Hull contact is possible. Passenger evacuation would be worse in this sea. Joe approved the maneuver. Visible doubt became responsible command. I listened to Sabine's breathing between orders. It shortened when the ferry rolled, then steadied before she spoke. Human fear changing and managed. Nothing like the clone's polished distress. I tapped our check-in once through the protected line, then stopped. Operational traffic had priority. A moment later, 3 soft clicks returned during a clear interval. Safe to answer. Still here. Night Heron took the ferry's weight along reinforced fenders while the tug pulled its bow away from stone. Metal groaned across the channel. Dev watched the transmitter spectrum. I watched bridge timing and position data. Sabine asked the ferry captain to engage auxiliary control on her count. 3, 2, 1. The ferry's heading shifted by 4 degrees, then 6. The breakwater slid out of its projected path. The false channel went silent. The real harbor grew louder. Engines, tow commands, rain, relief disguised as procedure. Authorities confirmed they had secured the portable transmitter, amplifier, generator skid, and a laptop running voice cloning software. The equipment was registered to Voss Marine Recovery. Corbin Voss had been detained at the basin office under lawful authority. We did not celebrate until the ferry was stable. Meridian Star remained outside the reef with its tug, never grounding. Voss's intended recovery claim vanished with the diversion. Financial motive, checked-out equipment, seminar source files, live harmonic match, and the seized transmission package now formed one causal chain. Joe read the confirmation without triumph. "Keep recording," she said. Evidence was not a trophy. It was a promise that the truth could survive excitement. Sabine escorted the ferry inside at reduced speed. Her crew reported minor fender damage and no injuries. When Night Heron crossed the harbor mouth, its real bridge stamp appeared on my display with every transmission. I had never found metadata beautiful before. Gold pulses moved beside the live Morse timing, imperfect and undeniable. The ship returned through black water under its own name. I remained at the console until Joe formally ended emergency status. Dev sealed the harmonic captures. We exported logs, signed timestamps, and wrote separate preliminary statements. Sabine did not enter harbor radio until invited by Joe. When she did, rain shone on her coat and exhaustion softened her posture. She looked at me across the evidence line. Neither of us crossed it. "Captain Ward," I said, because formal statements came first. She described the ferry rescue, the verified local circuit, and her decision to reject the false call. I asked only technical questions. She answered without editing herself into perfection. At one point she said, "I was uncertain whether the buffer maneuver would hold." Joe recorded it. Nothing terrible happened because a captain admitted doubt. My statement took longer. I explained every indicator, confidence level, limitation, and decision boundary. I stated that the Morse timing alone was not authentication. It mattered because it aligned with bridge stamps, radar, harmonic analysis, and live operator behavior. I refused the word proof until the seized equipment logs were confirmed. Sabine waited outside while I finished, protecting the separation we had built. Dev's statement documented the governor flutter and amplifier phase wobble. Joe sealed all 3 accounts before discussing arrests, contracts, or public messaging. Only then did she tell us Voss's laptop contained scheduled scripts for 2 diversions, including the exact ferry scenario. He had planned to draw rescue craft toward Black Glass Reef while Meridian Star crossed nearby in storm current. The second call had been his final attempt. Dawn began as a thin gray seam behind the harbor roofs. Joe released Sabine from operational debrief and released me from consulting duty until afternoon. My contract review remained with Joe and an independent committee, exactly as Sabine's recusal required. The legal and professional imbalance was not merely promised away. It had been removed on paper, in practice, and through the hardest night we had shared. Sabine asked whether I would meet her on Dawn Pier after we changed out of storm gear. She phrased it as a question with no urgency attached. I said yes. Then we walked in opposite directions. The separation lasted 23 minutes. I know because timing was still my favorite defense, and because I counted every one. When I reached the pier, Sabine wore a dark wool coat over a fresh shirt. Her hair was still damp at the temples. Sunrise turned the water pale gold behind her. Exactly nothing in the harbor required us to stand together now. That freedom made my knees less reliable than the storm had. "The emergency is over," she said. "Our statements are complete. My recusal remains permanent for any decision involving your harbor contract." I nodded. I checked. Her mouth curved. "Of course you did." Then the smile faded into something more vulnerable. "May I tell you what I want, without asking you to change your work, your home, or your judgment?" "Yes." The word came before analysis. Sabine drew one careful breath. "I want to know you when nobody is in danger. I want coffee that does not taste like emergency equipment. I want your honest uncertainty and your terrible jokes. I am not asking for an answer because I helped keep you safe. I am asking because we are both free to say no." I looked at the woman who had stepped back when desire could have borrowed power. "I want you too," I said. "Not because you believed me. Because you made room for me to be useful without being infallible." My voice shook. I let it. "I want dinners, arguments, separate keys, and a great deal of inconvenient honesty." Sabine's eyes brightened. "Separate keys?" "I have met captains. You label everything." "Reasonable." We laughed softly, the storm still dripping from ropes around us. Then she asked, "May I kiss you, Tessa?" Clear words. No rank inside them, no rescue debt, no danger making the answer louder. "Yes," I said again. Sabine touched my cheek first, giving me time to move. I closed the distance. Our first kiss was warm, careful, and brief enough to remain a beginning rather than a claim. When we parted, her forehead rested lightly against mine. The harbor behind us kept working. So did we. We did not turn the pier into a promise factory. Sabine asked whether breakfast counted as a first date. I said only if neither of us discussed waveform artifacts before the second cup. She agreed with visible reluctance. We walked to opposite ends of the pier first to collect our bags, then met again in the middle. It felt practical, uncinematic, and entirely ours. At breakfast, we chose rules before fantasies. No operational conversations in bed, no using private signals to bypass harbor procedure, no expectation that either profession would shrink for the relationship. We would tell Jo once we had decided this was real enough to disclose, not because she owned our choices, but because transparency protected everyone. Sabine buttered toast with the concentration of a navigation exercise. Our first real disagreement arrived before the plates were cleared. Sabine wanted me driven home because I had been awake all night. I wanted to walk because my body needed quiet movement. She began to sound like a captain. I raised one eyebrow. She stopped, apologized, and asked what support would help. I accepted a ride halfway and walked the rest. Healthy trust was not effortless. It was repair performed early. Voss was charged through ordinary legal channels with fraudulent distress transmission, interference with rescue operations, and related financial offenses. The exact case would take months, perhaps longer. I gave no interviews beyond the approved factual briefing. Sabine refused invitations to dramatize her stolen voice on television. The harbor needs a better system, she said, not a better villain story. I loved her a little more for disappointing the cameras. Jo extended my consultancy through an independent review panel. Sabine neither attended nor submitted an opinion. The contract funded protocol design, crew workshops, and public signal literacy sessions. I kept my outside acoustic forensics clients and my apartment above the tailor shop. The harbor became part of my work, not the owner of it. That distinction kept love from becoming another employment condition. Dev and I rebuilt the authentication model around layers crews could actually use. We removed technical steps that slowed response without improving judgment. Fisher crews suggested visual beacon checks. Ferry captains requested clearer confidence language. Dispatchers wanted codes that survived wet gloves and bad hearing. Sabine attended as one captain among many, sometimes disagreeing with me and never expecting the room to treat her preference as mine. Our second date happened on the pilot boat during a daylight equipment check, with Jo technically present and loudly pretending not to notice us sharing pastries. Sabine asked before brushing sugar from my sleeve. I said yes, then informed her the gesture had exceeded approved pastry protocol. File a report, she said. I intend to request a repeat offense. We learned each other outside emergency light. Sabine hated sweet coffee, loved terrible detective novels, and went silent when worried about someone. I over-explained when afraid of being misunderstood and alphabetized spices as if cumin might commit fraud. Neither habit vanished under romance. We named them, laughed when possible, and apologized when necessary. Attraction was not the cure. It was a reason to practice honesty with more care. 1 month later, Sabine invited me aboard her houseboat for dinner. I arrived with my own overnight bag and a clear plan to leave before work. We kissed in the galley until the kettle screamed, then laughed hard enough to ruin the mood in the best way. The night that followed remained ours, private and unhurried. In the morning, I went home to my own bed and slept there beautifully. The seized transmitter became evidence, but a non-functional training replica was built for the harbor program. Dev reproduced its harmonic flaws without cloning any real person's voice. I designed exercises in which students compared machine timing, human breath, location data, and procedure. The brass Morse key remained at harbor radio until the new classroom was ready. Every time I passed it, I remembered how obsolete things can reveal modern lies. Sabine's crew adopted the layered protocol first, then helped revise it after 2 drills. She insisted junior officers be allowed to state uncertainty without penalty. During one session, a deck officer challenged her route choice and proved correct. Sabine thanked her in front of everyone. Confidence, I realized, was strongest when it did not need to win every room. 3 months after the storm, the old customs room beside the dry dock reopened as harbor classroom. Sea glass paint brightened the walls. Antique brass fixtures echoed the harbor's history. Jo donated charts, Dev mounted acoustic displays, and Sabine's crew built a weatherproof demonstration console. I chose a place beside the front desk for the brass Morse key, no longer a museum piece and not quite an alarm. On opening morning, I carried the key from Harbor Radio in both hands. Sabine walked beside me but did not take it, even when the bass grew heavy. "Need help?" she asked. I considered pride, wrists, and practicality. "Yes, under the left side." We carried it together without turning cooperation into rescue. That small choice felt like the whole relationship in miniature. 6 months after the false call, the Harbor launched its authenticated voice and code protocol. It belonged to the crews because they had designed it with us. No single voice, code, stamp, beacon, or clever machine could command automatic belief. People checked layers, named uncertainty, and kept real distress traffic moving. The system did not promise perfect certainty. It promised better decisions made together. I taught the first public class in Harbor Classroom while continuing my independent consulting work. Sabine remained captain of the Night Heron, still living on her houseboat and still leaving labeled containers in my refrigerator. We spent 4 nights a week together and protected the others without scorekeeping. Love fit our lives because neither life had been emptied to make room. Joe sat in the back row pretending to evaluate emergency pedagogy. Dev adjusted a speaker that was already working. Sabine leaned against the wall in civilian clothes, her face bright in the pale sunrise light. Exactly none of them interrupted when I placed my fingers on the restored brass key. The room quieted around one old mechanical click. I explained that the opening signal had once been only a test, then a private check-in, then evidence against a lie. Now it meant something larger. I tapped short, held, short. Across the room, Sabine answered on the tabletop. Short, short, held. Students smiled without knowing every history inside the sound. They did not need to. The meaning was ready for them. Safe to answer, I told the class. Not safe from every storm, not certain of every voice. Safe to pause, verify, collaborate, and speak. Through the classroom window, Night Heron rested in sea glass water under pale gold morning. The key gleamed beside my hand, useful because we had changed what usefulness meant. After class, Sabine joined me at the window. "Coffee?" she asked. "Is it drinkable?" "Unconfirmed." I tapped our signal against the sill. She answered, then kissed my temple with permission already folded into the smile I gave her. The Harbor carried voices across water, each one asking to be heard. I finally understood that trust was not certainty. It was the courage to answer carefully. Would you have trusted the familiar voice or waited for the signal beneath it? Share your answer and subscribe to Cora's GL Nights for more dangerous, tender stories where love earns its way through the dark. Until our next midnight watch, remember this. The safest heart is not the one that never answers, but the one that knows how to listen.